Hello and welcome to my channel. With me today I have an interesting video of a lady asking the Jews living in either the diaspora or Israel when they realize that Zionist mythology of Israel is a lie. Now, this lady further says that this is a calling to all the Jews who are concerned about what's happening in Gaza. What was that time that just made them ask, what about Palestine? And the mythological lie that Israel was their land. Here's the video.
This is a call-in to all Jews who support Palestine, all Jews who are concerned about what is happening in Gaza. Whether you are Jewish and in the diaspora or Jewish and living in Israel, I want to hear your perspectives on this. When did you realize that the Zionist mythology of Israel was a lie? When did you start to ask yourself the question of, what about Palestine? What was the moment? What was the experience? What was the educational material? What happened that got you to start questioning the mythology that you had been taught about Israel being our land? Our Muslim brothers and sisters, not only in Palestine, Gaza, and the West Bank, but all across the world, are suffering. They are heartbroken. They are watching a genocide happen in Palestine and watching Jewish people and white people, really the world over, turn their backs and ignore it and pretend that that's not what it is. And we need to show them that we have their backs, that we're going to speak loudly, that we are in the process of unlearning, that we are in the process of figuring out how to ally up for them. So please post your unlearning moment. What happened? When did you start to interrogate the messages that you had received as children or from your faith community, so that we can provide them some counterexamples and show how much
Alpha.
care.
Is it just me, or the more people talk about this, the more it's helping people learn the truth and unlearn certain things or lies they were taught? Seeing others responding and just sharing those moments just shows how many people are really coming to the realization. A lot of people share their experiences, and I would advise that you stay glued as I share some of the stitches with you, and make sure to watch the video to the very end, because I will be sharing more experiences from the comments. Here are the stitches.
Of what about Palestine?
Too freaking late. I started asking myself that question too freaking late. I grew up culturally Jewish. My friends, my boyfriends, my life was surrounded by Jewish people. In fact, it was like kind of cool to be Jewish when I grew up. I didn't even really know the concept of Zionism, because Zionism was just Judaism, right? The idea that Israel should be a place, a safe haven for Jewish people. That just was what it was. The concept of birthright made total sense. I didn't even question it. The fact that the government would subsidize a trip to Israel so that you could see your homeland, that didn't strike me as weird at all. And the Jewish population is pretty small, so there's only a few degrees of separation between you and somebody who lives in Israel, and it just felt like part of the package of being Jewish. I didn't question the fact that after the Holocaust we would need a safe haven. And yes, 6 million people dying this close in terms of the history of the world is terrifying. And yes, Jewish people are not the most beloved people on the planet, right? Traditionally, we're not. So yeah, it made sense to me. But I didn't think about how many other people have been genocided and that they don't get their own theocratic ethno-state. I didn't know that in order to achieve that, in order to get Israel to be Israel, that Palestinians had to be forcibly removed from their homes. I didn't know that it was an illegal occupation. I didn't know that Israel controlled a huge percentage of Palestinians' water. I didn't know that it was a 75-year occupation. I didn't know that Palestinians had to move through checkpoints in order to get anywhere. I didn't know that 90% of their economy is from handouts, that like the world has been giving them resources because they don't have any of their own because of said occupation. I didn't know that there were thousands of Palestinian prisoners in Israel that don't get a trial, hundreds of whom are kids. I didn't know that Israel had one of the strongest militaries in the world and provides military supplies to a lot of the rest of the world. I didn't think about the fact that putting an ally in the middle of the Middle East filled with Jews as a gift from the US and from the British would be a super smart political tactic, because none of the rest of the world wanted us anywhere. My first thought after the October 7th attack was what a brutal, horrific thing to happen to the Jewish population and to the Israeli civilians, and I still believe that that is true. However, I didn't have context. And now that over 10,000 Palestinians have died, now that I know that Israel dropped more bombs in 6 days than the U.S. dropped in Afghanistan in an entire year of war, now that I've listened and learned for the past 3 weeks, I wish I had asked, what about Palestine, sooner?
About Palestine.
I am not Jewish, obviously, but I did want to address this question because I was raised in a very Christian Zionist framework. And again, I want to keep naming that framework of Christian Zionism on here because it is so important to understand that many Americans who are supporting unequivocally the actions of the state of Israel has nothing to do with Judaism and everything to do with the framework, in fact, of Christian supremacy. And the modern state of Israel is, for many Christians, intertwined with American exceptionalism. Both states seen as uniquely somehow God's nations. And anyone who opposes Israel is just doing it because they hate God, right? The idea that there were people who resisted Israel because of what the creation of Israel cost them and their parents and their grandparents just wasn't even a factor in the conversation. And for me, honestly, it was going to Israel in seminary and visiting the occupied West Bank, because that is where Bethlehem, the birthplace of Christ, is. It really crystallized and clarified for me the experience of Palestinians. And as much as we need to understand the very real grief and fear and trauma that led to the creation of Israel for the Jewish people, we're never going to have peace if we can't understand the grief and trauma and loss of the Palestinian people and what the state of Israel cost them.
What about Palestine?
So as an American Jew, I feel like I've had a lot of brushes with Zionism and just like sort of narrowly avoided each one. It started when I was in Hebrew school. This is about third grade, and we get a teacher who is from Israel, has recently moved to the area. And in fourth grade, I had his wife. Both of them, obviously, since they'd just come from Israel, talked all about Israel. And I found this like incredibly irrelevant to me. I had only gone to Hebrew school because my mom told me I could get my ears pierced when I had a bat mitzvah. So I was really only there for that. And my connection to Judaism came really from what I knew of my family's history, which was in Eastern Europe, Hungary, Lithuania, Romania, Ukraine, places like that, and then in New York, where we first emigrated to. So Israel just like did not seem relevant to me at all, and I hated sitting through Hebrew school classes on it that I just did not care about. Also, a big part of why I never fell for this propaganda is my parents, and I should give them credit where credit is due, because when my dad heard that we were studying Israel and learning all this touristy Israel stuff and how great it was there and how we should all go there on birthright one day and then join the IDF and make Aliyah, he was like, you are not going to Israel. It's dangerous there. There's a conflict there. And I had vaguely heard of Israel-Palestine's relations like on the news. So all I knew about Israel outside of Hebrew school was that it's a dangerous place to go. And then all I was hearing in Hebrew school was that it's like the best place ever and so necessary for Jews. And like we did all these projects on the founders of Israel. In fact, the only reason I did not fail out of and have to repeat 5th grade of Hebrew school was because I pulled a project on Golda Meir out of my ass. I had to do that, or I would have been stuck in Hebrew school an extra year, which, believe me, I did not want to do. So I go through Hebrew school this whole time just kind of having a bad feeling about Israel and just not really getting why it was supposed to be important to me. And throughout Hebrew school, they're showing you a lot of like Holocaust imagery that's really disturbing, so you understand why Israel is needed. And it is pretty baked into Judaism. Like in the Passover Seder, the last thing you say is next year in Jerusalem. Like we're hoping to go back. But my family, to their credit, never says next year in Jerusalem because we don't have any connection to Israel. And basically everyone in my family thinks that Israel was a bad choice for a place to do a Jewish state. And our attitude toward it, which comes from this joke my grandfather once made, is like, why did they have to put the Jewish state somewhere people already were living? Why couldn't they just have picked like an unpopulated corner of Wyoming instead, where hardly anyone lives anyway? So every year, instead of next year in Jerusalem at the Passover Seder, we say next year in Wyoming. All that to say, the Holocaust imagery was terrible, but it didn't really move me, and I distinctly remember the first time I heard about another recent genocide in middle school, which was the Great Purge. And I was like, that's so crazy that we don't learn about any other genocides. And then I learned about the Rwandan genocide, and I was like, what? Why did I only ever hear about the Holocaust? Not just in Hebrew school, but also in elementary school. But anyway, the thing that really first made me ask what about Palestine was when I read this book, Habibi, in 8th grade. I don't know if you know this book, but it is just one of my most formative books that I've ever read in my entire life. It's about a Palestinian American family who moves to Israel, and the young daughter falls in love with a Jewish boy. It's written by a Palestinian author, and it was the first time I had ever heard any kind of Palestinian perspective on Israel. And that was the first time I ever felt like, you know what, it would be really cool to go to Israel for a visit just to see it. And I knew the only way I was going to be able to afford that was to go on Birthright. But I also knew that going on Birthright, there would be even more pro-Israel propaganda shoved down my throat. Nevertheless, I vaguely planned to go on Birthright, but I kept putting it off, largely because of an experience I had my freshman year of college. So because there was no other Jewish life on my campus, I started going to the Chabad house, and they had this class they were running that paid you $350 to take it for 10 weeks, learning about each of the 10 commandments through like their perspective. The class itself was not the issue, but two things happened at Chabad that really made me realize that I did not even want to align myself with like mainstream Judaism at all. The first one was the attitude towards marriage. And I knew like from the Broad City episode and jokes about finding a nice Jewish boy that like that was an important thing to Jewish people, but I did not know it was to this level. I remember specifically once the rabbi said that it was so important to find your bashert, your Jewish soulmate, that you might have to go all the way to Israel to do that, and that's okay. Which really underscores everything the creator I stitched has been saying about birthright. I had never encountered Jews before who were like anti-intermarriage, like they really want you to marry somebody who is ethnically Jewish and then have them become more religious. And yes, people can convert, but really the focus on ethnic Judaism made me feel like it was a bit of a keep the bloodlines pure kind of thing. This just had echoes of white supremacy to me, and I would yell that far and wide because I was so upset about it. I just never encountered that attitude before. And there was this one guy in the course who particularly loved to rail against intermarriage and how he couldn't get his brother to date Jewish girls. And one day he started talking about how much he supported Trump for his stance on Israel. And keep in mind, this is early 2016 before the election, so the stakes are pretty damn high. He also said he thinks Bernie Sanders is a traitor to the Jewish people for his stance on Palestine, and that in particular really revved me up. And listen, I am from Burlington, Vermont, okay? Bernie Sanders is basically our head of state. We love him, and we don't just love him for his politics, although I agree with almost all of his politics. We love him because he's a really good person, and a lot of us have had personal encounters with him and know him, and he's just like a good guy. Bernie also is originally from Brooklyn, like my family, and came to Burlington, Vermont like my family. And he was the only Jew I'd ever heard of not unequivocally supporting Israel at the time. So when this guy says that, I was like, I am out of here. I had never met a conservative Jew before. Other than the Zionism, I came from a very progressive synagogue, and I was shocked and horrified because I could see that Trump was aligning himself with neo-Nazism and white supremacy and people who wanted to eliminate all Jews. So this was my other brush with Zionism, and it's kind of a miracle I didn't fall for it. I also almost went on Birthright, but then I kept putting it off because of COVID, and I kept putting it off because I wanted someone to go with me because I didn't want to buy into all the propaganda. And then finally, in my final year of eligibility this year, I'm 26 right now, it was full, so I couldn't go. And now I probably never will see Israel, and that's okay with me because I really only ever wanted to go as a tourist. And I feel kind of lucky about that because I've come so close to being indoctrinated so many times. And maybe it was my upbringing and my parents' views on Israel, or maybe it was just me seeing the contradictions and how it was talked about, but I just never quite fell for it because I could see that supporting Israel also meant supporting a lot of things that I don't support. For example, Donald Trump and genocide. So that's my story of how I made it through Zionist spaces without ever quite buying in.
Was a lie.
The secret is out. Neutrogena is the retinol brand used most by dermatologists.
This film right here. This film broke me. This film changed my life forever. When I saw that film, I had already started questioning a lot about Zionism, but I was like 14, 15 years old, so
I was really alone in this journey of unlearning. I had the incredible privilege of making friends with 2 Palestinians online on Tumblr, and they taught me so much, and I'm really, really grateful for them. But even with like those first few months, I was still like really, really trying to convince myself, like, no, like there has to be something good. Like there really does, like there has to be something. And then I saw this film, and it changed my brain chemistry. There were a lot of things in that film that I didn't know was happening. I think that the most shocking thing to me was the midnight raids where the IOF would kidnap children in the middle of the night. There's a lot in that film, and I don't want to spoil. And it is a documentary about a man basically just documenting the birth of his new son, and you know, his life as he's growing, and just showing what life is like in the West Bank. I haven't seen it in a long time. I haven't seen it in a few years, not even just a few, but I've seen it twice, and I think the last time I saw it was in 2013, and I haven't been able to watch it again since. And it really did something to me. So I really recommend that everybody watch this. I don't care if you happened upon my video, you're anti-Zionist or you're Zionist. Watch 5 Broken Cameras. Watch 5 Broken Cameras. Please. Please.
All Jews who are...
So mine was, there was a lot of little things, and a lot of tiny things that made me see, that I think let me see that maybe everything wasn't just as I thought it was. And I think that paved the way for this big moment, because like I think the little things kind of like picked at the foundation. Let's say like my Zionism was like a house, right? I think all these little things were like picking and like at the foundation of the house and like decreasing its stability, like people talking about Palestine, people talking about the history and making me question and second guess what I had been taught. That was picking away at the foundations, right? And forcing me to look more into things. And so that was picking away at the foundations. And then this article that I read, I think my freshman year of college, was, I think, anthropology. And it was like an archaeological article. Right. Try saying that 5 times fast. It was about how the Israeli government spends a lot of time and money trying to, specifically around the old Jerusalem, so like the old city, trying to actively displace Palestinians. And it talked about like how the justice system was working against them and stuff like that, which I had never heard of before. They were actively trying to displace them, kick them out of their homes so they could expand like the temple complex and build an archaeological park around it. And just reading that, like, I love history. I love a good archaeological park, but I could not fathom kicking people out of their homes to do it. Like, to me, those two things are not compatible. Like, I love archaeology, and I would never do that. Like, it's not that important to me, right? It's cool, but it's never that important to kick somebody out of their house, bulldoze their house, or force them to evict with nowhere to go, in favor of like an archaeological park. And I love history, I love archaeology, but I was like, it's never that serious. So what the f is going on here?
Now, I found an interesting article of an American Jew that I would really love to share with you guys. It reads, there's a story from last week I can't get out of my head. A Palestinian family takes a taxi to their daughter's home in Gaza City, 5 minutes away on the last day of Ramadan, because they thought they would be safer from the ongoing Israeli strikes. They are unpacking the car when suddenly a military drone strikes, unaliving the taxi driver, the father, the mother, and wounding the son, 28. For many American Jews who were raised to see Palestinians as the enemy, it might come as a shock to recognize the Israeli military as the aggressor in this situation, or to mourn the victims of that strike. But this week, I mourn. I was raised to unequivocally support Israel. As a second-generation American Jew and granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, I never questioned Israel's existence, actions, and connection to the United States. Not because debate wasn't encouraged in my house, but because I never even thought to ask. For days after Israeli police invaded Al Aqsa Mosque, a Muslim holy site in the East Jerusalem, the questions and the words finally came to me, and I took to Twitter to share my newly crystallized feelings to see if they would resonate. Being an American Jew is a mind F. The now viral thread began. It goes on to describe how American Jews are raised to believe in the infallibility of Israel, how the intergenerational trauma of the Holocaust shapes our view of the region, and how our history of oppression should make us even more empathetic to the displacement and unaliving of the Palestinians. Sharing even the most benign opinions online is terrifying, so I was particularly worried about how something so personal would be received. That's why I was surprised and humbled by the overwhelmingly affirmative response, with fellow American Jews publicly and privately agreeing they are no longer able to accept the party line on Israel-US relations. They've been grappling with the vision of Israel presented on trips organized by groups like Birthright versus what they've seen unfold on the ground, how to square their love for their people and history with their commitment to racial and social justice, and how Israel's actions in Palestine seem to fly in the face of Tikkun Olam, the Jewish principle of improving the world through action. While many of us have felt isolated in our views by speaking out, we are finding solidarity. Over the past 15 years, the anti-occupation Jewish left in America has been growing, with organizations like If Not Now and J Street leading the charge. But because the conflict has so often been boiled down to a binary, you either support Israel or you support its destruction. For many of us, it felt like a betrayal to even consider the other side. Even now, with strength in numbers, there's still a genuine fear of using words and phrases like apartheid and ethnic cleansing, even if they are applicable. There is an instinct to retreat. Growing up in the shadow of the Holocaust and the intergenerational trauma of descending from survivors of genocide, I can't help but see my family in their faces. The near annihilation of the Jewish people 4 decades before I was born still courses through my veins, and it is this visceral feeling of violence and oppression that has made me feel certain that speaking out now is the right thing to do, and already too little too late. The truth is that causing trauma to another group will never ease our own. Unaliving more than 200 Palestinians in 2 weeks won't bring back our ancestors who perished in the Holocaust, and it certainly won't bring us closer to a lasting peace. Until we recognize that no one is safe, until we are all safe, the cycle of oppression will play on. Here are a few experiences from the comments. This one says, when I went to Israel on Birthright and saw a literal airstrike on the first day while I was sitting in a restaurant. In 2020, when I was in college, it started unraveling, and then I went on Birthright that year, and it's something so clearly being hidden from us. 2014 protective age is really when I started deconstructing my education and questioning what I thought I knew. Alright, we have come to the end of the video, guys. Make sure to share your thoughts on this video in the comment section. Don't forget to like, subscribe. From me to bye-bye, and see you in my next video.